The following presentation is a gift from the team at Streamline Publishing, publishers of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air Magazine, and weekly newsletters Fine Art Today, Realism Today, Plein Air Today, and American Watercolor, and events, the Plein Air Convention and the Figurative Art Convention. We offer over 400 different art instruction tutorials and ultra high-quality video by the world's leading artists. If you like what you see, help us support our artists and our team with your purchase. Each video aired has a special discount code for today only in the comments section with a link to the video offered. And to see everything we do, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, simply click the other link, which says, see everything we do. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air Magazine. Thank you for tuning in every day at 3 p.m. Eastern. We're here to keep you occupied and have some fun in these strange times. We're teaching art. And today we have a brand new release from Debra Joy Groesser, who is the head of the American Impressionist Society. This one's called Understanding the Effects of Light.
Hi, I'm Debra Joy Groesser, and I'm so pleased that you've joined me for my very first instructional art video. For those of you who may not know me, I have been painting for most of my life, since I was 14 or so. I got my art degree in painting from Bellevue College in Bellevue, Nebraska, way back in the dark ages in 1978, and went on to work as a commercial artist for a few years. And then took a little detour in real estate for about 10 years. And that ended up being a very helpful thing for me. I didn't realize it at the time, but I learned so much about marketing that's ultimately helped me in my art career. And then in 1996, bought a little building in our downtown and built my studio and a little gallery, and opened Windsong Gallery and Studio in 1997 in our little downtown of Ralston, Nebraska. I have absolutely loved plein air painting. I took my first plein air workshop in 1997, and as I said, 1996 is when I went back to my art career full-time. 1997, started painting plein air, and I've never looked back. It has just brought so much joy and made such a difference in my work and in my career. So in this video, I'm going to be teaching you my process as far as painting the effects of light. We're going to talk about basic landscape painting elements, composition, value, all of those kind of things. We're going to talk about the 5 types of light, and I hope by the time you're done watching this video that you will have more confidence to create paintings that really express the effects of light, the feeling of the subject that you're painting, help you capture the spirit of those places that you go out and paint. So with that, let's get started. All right, let's talk about painting the effects of light and why painting from life versus painting from photographs is so incredibly important to your work. The Impressionists understood this. The Impressionists went out and painted at all different times of day, painted the same subjects over and over again in order to understand how light described their subject and how it affected the color and the atmosphere in their subjects. And so that's what we're going to do. Painting from life versus painting from photographs, several reasons that you want to do this is you can see and capture color and light that you cannot see in a photograph. And I have several examples for you that I'm going to show you here shortly. But you can see the color so much more accurately and just subtle nuances when you're studying from life versus a photograph. When you paint outdoors from life, it's also a wonderful way to enjoy the outdoors. And for me, I love being outside, and so combining my love of painting and my love of being outdoors in nature, it's the perfect pair. When you paint from life, you end up learning to paint a lot more faster and a lot more intuitively, because the light is changing so quickly and the shadows change so quickly. The sun doesn't stand still for us when we're painting outdoors. So you learn to paint a lot more intuitively and to paint quickly. You learn to capture the color a lot more accurately right off the bat. Paintings done on location have a freshness that is really difficult to duplicate in the studio. And again, I have some examples I'm going to show you of plein air pieces and then studio pieces that I did from those plein air pieces. I'm going to attempt to capture the freshness of one of my plein air paintings in the demo I'm going to do for you later on in this video. So we'll see how it goes, but it's a challenge. It's really a challenge, because when you're painting on location, painting from life, everything that you experience out there ends up going into that painting. Everything that you smell and you feel, the bugs, whether you're being bothered by bugs or the weather, everything, the smells, when you're by the ocean, the smell of the ocean. I feel like when I'm out painting from life, all of that I experience ends up going into that painting. And that's always what I hope that the people that look at my paintings feel when they look at it, is they feel what I felt when I painted it, and almost that they can put themselves there and feel like they're experiencing the spirit of that place. Once you've gotten experienced at painting plein air, you'll be able to paint more accurately from photographs. In photos, the lights are washed out and the shadows are really dark. So once you learn and experience painting from life, you'll see how colorful the shadows actually are. And you'll see how colorful the light is too. And again, I'll point this out in the examples I'm going to show you next. Okay, here's my first example, and I want to tell you a little story about this one. My very first plein air workshop was out in the Tetons in Wyoming. And we had spent the week doing a lot of studies of the mountains, and I was so in love with the colors that I saw. The shadows in the mountain were the most beautiful blues and purples, and the light, the colors in the light on those mountains were pinks and lavenders and oranges and just beautiful, beautiful warm tones. And I was so inspired, I decided to take some time when we were done with the workshop for the day, and I drove all over the park, took lots and lots of photographs with my old 35mm camera, and thought that I would have a lot of wonderful reference photos when I got home that I could paint from. And I was so disappointed about $200–300 later, after I got all of these photos developed. And I looked at them and they were all gray and brown. And those beautiful colors I had seen on the mountains weren't there. The camera just didn't capture it. So that was the best lesson for me as far as why it's so important to paint from life and not rely on photographs. So I'd like to show you these examples right here. This is a painting that I did in the Tetons a couple of years ago, and this was done on the spot, plein air, from life. And I want to show you the photographs. These two were taken about the time I finished this painting, so it was a little bit later. This is pretty early morning when I started this one. So the light's a little bit different, but you can see the difference in the photos. These are all blue. You see none of the gorgeous warm tones that I saw. And the same with the trees. You can see the light and shadow on the trees, but the shadows are extremely dark. And they were not that dark when I painted them from life. So look at how much more life this has than this. This is beautiful, but it doesn't have the life and it doesn't have the feeling of the place nearly as much as this does. This is another photograph that I took of the same mountains a couple years before. And this is a little bit more direct light. You can see kind of some warm tones, but you don't see the beautiful shadows. So this painting to me, or this photograph, to me just is kind of and it just doesn't have the life that that painting has. So this was such a good lesson for me. It was the light bulb moment that really changed my career as far as my paintings, and really convinced me how important it was to get out there and paint from life. So let me show you another example here. All right, let's take a look at this one. This is another one with some examples of plein air studies, a studio piece, and the reference photos. So these are from Garapata State Park in California. This one is this rock right here. And if you look at that photo, this was taken just a little, not very long after I finished painting this. And you can see the light here, but you can't see the color in it. And this looks like a dark blob. It's really impossible to see all the subtleties in those shadows. And the same thing in the water. This is what I actually saw. And if you look closely, you'll see these beautiful green tones in the shadows, along with the warmth. Same thing in the light, some beautiful cools and beautiful warm tones that you just don't see in this photograph. And then with the water, these deep, deep blues with some purples and warms in there, and then the cool green, silvery gray as you get into the foam. You just can't see that at all in this photograph. This one was about a 30-minute study that I did on a terribly windy afternoon. I think the wind was blowing maybe 40 miles an hour, and my hand was going like this. And so this ended up just being a quick color study. Keep in mind that it's just important, if you don't have time to do a completed painting on location, just get those colors down, because it's incredibly good reference material for you later on if you decide that you want to do a studio painting. And this one you can see, here's the photo from when I started painting this. And look at these shadows, just dark, dark, a lot of blue. When you look at the actual painting, there wasn't much blue at all, and there was a lot of color. So quite a contrast there. And then if you look at this light, it looks almost white, doesn't it? And if you look at the painting, it was not white at all. It was very colorful, beautiful warm tones. So another good example of why it's so important. This captures the feeling of that place, even though it's so simple and just color notes and a very simplified drawing. This is a print of the studio painting I did, so the colors are off a little bit. This was a 24 by 24 oil, and I called it Faith, Strength, and Perseverance. And there's a great story I wrote on my blog about this painting. If you go to my website, you can read all about the story behind it. But you can see I was able to use this photograph for the drawing to get the drawing correct, the shapes of the light correct. And then I was able to take and use these two paintings and incorporate these gorgeous colors that I saw into the actual painting. So even though it's hard to tell, because this is just a 12 by 12 and the actual painting is 24 by 24, so it's 4 times this. It's a little bit hard to tell, but it doesn't have the freshness that these have, but it has accurate color and it has a wonderful feeling of that day and the light and what the weather was like. It has a wonderful feeling of what that day was actually like. So let's look at another example. So the next one I want to show you, these are photographs of a plein air painting, a studio painting, and reference paintings again. And this one's pretty dramatic because the color in the photos are really dark. So let's take a look here. These are the reference photos, different angles and showing different pieces of the cliffs there at Garapata. And this is a photo of the plein air piece I did. This was a little 9x12, and look at that beautiful light and the color, and the atmosphere was a little bit misty that day, and you can see that in this painting. And look at this compared to this. Look how colorful and beautiful this shadow is compared to what you see right here. Then when I did the studio painting, again, as in the last example, I was able to combine these photos to get the drawing and the composition the way I wanted it and get the details a little bit more accurate. And then I was able to use the color from the plein air study to incorporate here. And again, look at the beautiful color here compared to the dark on the photograph. It's so dramatic. This original painting is actually 24x30, and this was 9x12. So another really good example of what you can do when you work from life and use the studies from life as your inspiration. So let's look at one more example. And this is the last example I want to share with you. This is a 10x20. This is the panorama. And you can see these are the reference photos. And this is the plein air piece. This is the actual piece I did from life standing in this location. So I want you to especially look at this one. Look at the sky. This is a really good example of how a photograph will wash out light areas. And look at the sky here. You can see these clouds in the distance if you look really close, but they're so light. And the blue of the sky is so light. You can barely make those out. And same in this photograph. You can just barely make them out. But what actually I saw was this beautiful warm cloud, beautiful blue sky. There actually was another little cloud that was starting to come over that eventually gave us a little shower right at the end of the painting. I also want you to look at the color of the water. Look at how intense blue-green and these gorgeous ochre colors. You don't see any of that in the photograph at all. Look at the light on the beach and on these rocks. You can tell it's a warm light from the photographs, but you just can't see how colorful that light was. And same thing with the rocks. And I especially want to point out this clump of trees. On this photograph, you can barely make out any kind of variation in color or value in that clump of trees. But look at the trees on the painting. There was so much beautiful color and so many subtleties in it when I was looking at it. Just, you would never know that by looking at the photo. And also look at the ground here, this scrub grass and weeds and things. It just looks like just a blah green, and it was so colorful. There were cool greens and warm greens, and there were yellows, and there was orange, and it was just beautiful. It was like a little symphony of color that you just don't see in this photograph. And this really captured that moment in time, that place, and this was a very emotional painting for me too. And I look at this painting and I remember everything I felt that day and everything I experienced. That happens a lot with really most of my plein air paintings. That's how I feel about them. I look at them and I just remember everything I experienced that day. So let's talk about next, since we're talking about light and painting the effects of light, let's talk about how to understand and pick out the 5 types of light in a landscape painting. So there are 5 types of light in a landscape painting, and let's talk about those. First, we have direct light. So direct light is the area that is getting, just like it says, direct light from the sun. So that's pretty obvious in here, what areas are getting direct light. Same in this painting, you can see the areas that are getting direct light from the sun. We have accents. There's usually a dark accent and light accents in a painting. Those are your lightest lights and darkest darks. And they're usually like a little highlight, where something just sparkles a little bit more as far as the light. And the dark accents are just deeper, deeper shadows. So you can see on this painting, here's a dark accent. Here's a light accent, the edge of this little flower. The accent on this waterfall, there was a little bit of reflection in the water, which was a light accent. And the deep dark shadows in these rocks down here, there were some dark accents there. You have your midtones, which is the area directly between the lit side of an object and the shadow side of an object. So kind of where the light and shadow meet, you'll have midtones. And you can see examples of that in here, where the light turns to shadow. And over in here, you've got light, you've got shadow, and these are the midtones in here. Then shadow, obviously, is the areas that are not lit at all. They don't have any sunlight hitting them. And again, you can see where the shadows are, where there's no light at all hitting them. Lots of shadows in this one. And then you have reflected light. And reflected light is something that, if you pay close attention to it, will really add a convincing element to your paintings. Basically, it's an object's color and value is affected by the light and color around it. So in this example, and you'll see this a lot with rocks especially, we've got reflected light here that is reflecting from this rock. So you have light that's bouncing down and hitting this rock, and then it's reflecting up into these rocks. So you have a little bit lighter area within these shadows where that light is bouncing up and reflecting. On this painting, these leaves were so brilliant and yellow and green that it caused reflected light back here on the building. So it's really fun to look at those little things. When you're painting the shadow side of a White House is another example, and I don't have a photo of that here, but if you can imagine a White House with a red shed next to it, and the red shed will reflect kind of pink onto the side of that house. So watch for things like that when you're painting. And another thing to keep in mind is when you have a bright blue sky, the blue from the sky is going to reflect down onto your ground plane, onto the tops of trees. So you can have cooler tones on the tops of buildings, on the tops of trees, ground plane, just because of that reflected light from that blue sky. So I have a series of paintings from Door County, Wisconsin that I'd like to show you. These are from the public beach in a small town called Ephraim. And I absolutely love painting this spot. There's a couple of beautiful little church steeples in the distance, and the light is always different every time I paint there. The boats in the bay there are always, it's never the same ones that are there when I'm there. Some days it's very windy, so there'll be waves, the water will be choppy. Some mornings are completely calm, and it's so interesting to me to see just whether it's cloudy or sunny, just all those different conditions, just how different the paintings can be, even though it's the same subject. And again, as we flip through these, I'd like you to keep in mind and pay attention to the different compositions. I didn't do the same composition every time. I varied it, looked for different directions, did some rectangular ones. So let's take a look at these and enjoy. So as you can see, all of those paintings had such a different feel for them. And like I said, it's almost like you got a really good feel for the personality of that place, the spirit of that place, just by seeing it in even different seasons. There was a fall scene in there as well. So I'm going to show you 3 more now that are from Door County also. It's an area called Rebolt's Creek. And the first one is a foggy scene. As we were painting here, the fog was coming in and out, and you almost couldn't even see the subject at one point. So it was a little bit of a challenge. Nice, cool light and beautiful warm shadows. And the next one is a vertical composition. Again, I did thumbnail sketches and I moved over a few steps, saw this scene, and really loved it. Loved the light, loved the big shapes, and loved the challenge of painting all these greens. But you see what a different feel this had to the foggy scene just because of the way the light was. And then the next one, this is the last of Rebolt's Creek, and this is a rectangular scene composition. And this was beautiful morning light, and I kind of got in the whole vista of this place, and it just was so attracted to that beautiful morning light. So again, you see the same place and 3 different moods to the place just by describing the light and the atmosphere. And the last series of paintings I want to share with you are all from Garapata State Park, the cliffs there at Garapata, south of Carmel. The first 2 you saw on the display board earlier, the plein air piece at the cliff's edge. The second one is the studio painting, which I call Morning Glory, that was done from that plein air painting. And these next 2 are from a different part of that cliff. I actually climbed down and got a really beautiful view of these rocks, and there's a little creek that flows through there that then goes down and flows into the ocean. This first one was beautiful, beautiful morning light. This one and the next one were both painted from photographs, but I have painted this place so many times. I understand now the color, as we were talking before. You do this enough, you understand where you need to adjust the colors from a photograph in the light and the shadow. So this first one was really beautiful morning light. And then we'll go to the next one. Same exact scene, different composition. You see I carried it up higher and made it a square composition. And you notice how different the colors are. It's all cool colors. It was a little bit more atmospheric that particular day. And the difference between the 2 paintings, same exact place, but 2 completely different feelings that you get from those paintings. That's what excites me about painting from life. And then the rest of these paintings I just want to show you are all from Garapata, and you can see the different times of day, the different compositions, and I hope you just enjoy seeing all the different moods and the different feelings that you get from these paintings just by taking note of the color and the atmosphere and the light. The first thing that I like to do once I get my thumbnail sketch done and get my composition determined is to get my canvas out and get it toned. Toning your canvas is something that's pretty personal to most artists. Some don't tone at all. I prefer to tone mine, and usually I try to use a complementary color to whatever the main colors are in the scene. And since I do a lot of landscapes and most of those have a lot of green and blue in them, cadmium red light is my go-to color to tone my canvas. So let me show you how I do that. I take a bristle brush and just dip it in my solvent. And I use an odorless mineral spirits here. Grab a little of my color and water it down with the solvent. You don't want it too thin, but you don't want it really thick so that it comes up in your paint when you start painting. And this only takes a couple of minutes. A lot of times I will tone my canvases ahead of time. If it's a really hot day, you can just tone them on location. And by the time you're ready to start painting, it's pretty well dry. The other thing that's nice, especially if you're painting outdoors, it's really nice to get rid of that white. It's kind of intimidating to face a blank white canvas. So I feel like the canvas is covered once you get that tone on there. All right. So you don't have to cover it totally because we're going to wipe this down, wipe all the excess off, so that all you have is just a nice little tone of light red. Grab a paper towel. Clean off my brush right away so I don't forget. And then we'll just take the paper towel and just wipe this down, wipe all this excess off. The nice thing about toning with a complementary color, when you paint, you rarely end up covering the entire canvas. There's almost always little bits of the canvas that'll show through. And especially when you have a painting that has a lot of green and blue in it, those little bits of red will really make the painting sing. It gives it a little bit of a sparkle because complementary colors enhance each other, intensify each other. So that's why I really like using the red. All right, we're going to take this to the next step now, and before we start actually painting, we're going to talk a little bit about colors in the landscape so that when I start blocking in the actual painting, you'll be able to keep things in mind as we go. So before we get started with actually painting and adding color to our canvas, let's talk a little bit about color in the landscape. And I want you to keep these things in mind as you're watching my demo. I will be talking about these as I do paint, but this will give you some things to kind of keep in mind and help you absorb these concepts as you watch. First of all, one big piece of advice I can give you is mix the color as you see it. If you overanalyze, you tend to get it wrong. And your first impression is usually right. If you're not sure what a color is, look at it quickly, then look away. And what was your first impression? So with value and color, you're going to hear me say compare, compare, compare. We're going to compare areas of color to areas that are next to them, and that will help you determine the correct color, the correct value. This will make more sense as we go along with the demo. We're going to start with large, flat, abstract shapes of color. So it'll be almost like working with flat pieces of construction paper, and I'll talk more about that. Once we have the canvas covered, then we're going to go back and modify all those big shapes. So things to keep in mind as far as color in the landscape. Placing complementary colors next to each other, as I mentioned with toning the canvas, they'll intensify both of the colors. Generally, if you have warm light, you're going to have cool shadows. So on a bright sunny day, it's warm light. So generally the shadows will be overall cool in temperature. When you have a gray day, the light is cooler. So generally the shadows are going to be warmer. So you can see in these examples that I have here, how this is very warm light, and you can see how cool these shadows are. Same thing with this one, very warm light in this one, very cool shadows. And this one, the light is very cool, and you can see the warmth in all of these shadows. Very different than the warm light. So another thing we're going to talk about is aerial perspective. And you have brighter colors in the foreground, and as the colors go back in the landscape, you'll notice that the bright colors drop out and things get grayer and bluer in the distance. And that is because there are layers of atmosphere between you, where you're standing, and distant hills or distant mountains. And the further the distance, the less you're going to see as far as the bright colors. The reds and yellows drop out first, and then as you go back, things get closer in value as well as getting lighter and grayer. Actually, lights get darker and darks get lighter as they go into the distance. So by the time you get to distant hills, you'll see the light and the shadow colors are pretty much the same value. It's just different temperatures in color. And this demo will illustrate that because we have some distant hills that do that. You can also do aerial perspective or express aerial perspective with texture. And so you'll see in this painting, there'll be a lot more texture in the foreground grasses that we're going to do as opposed to the background hills. And again, as I mentioned earlier, keep in mind that there are very few pure colors in a landscape. It's mostly neutralized colors and colorful grays, I like to call them. So, and then you'll have little pops of pure color here and there. So with that, let's go on to the next step. Now comes the fun part. Now we get started slinging some paint. So first thing, we're going to go ahead and draw just a very simple drawing on our toned canvas. And this drawing is simply a road map for you. So we're not going to draw every little tree and every little blade of grass. I'm going to basically just draw the outline of the major shapes, because two reasons. Number one, I want to avoid doing almost like a color book fill-in. And I've always found if I do too detailed of a drawing, I end up just painting in little pieces. And it just doesn't flow. It doesn't feel like a solid painting. It feels more like a paint by number. So over the years, I've learned to paint with a brush, do my drawing with a brush rather than a pencil. Just for that reason, I get way too detailed if I use a pencil. With the brush also, since you're just drawing outlines, you're less intimidated by changing your drawing and making adjustments. And that will result in a much more painterly painting. So I hope you'll try it. I know that's one thing that a lot of my students have had trouble getting used to and kind of resistant to, but in the end, it's been something that's helped them immensely. So I hope you'll try this. So here we go. I am using a number 0, what used to be a bright and is now a kind of a short filbert. and it's very stubby, but it's perfect for drawing. So let's get started. Now we used the thinned down Cad Red light for toning our canvas, and I'm going to use that same Cad Red light, also thinned down. I don't want thick paint because when I start laying in my color, I don't want that paint to start mixing in with my colors. It'll kind of muddy it up. So let's get started. I'm going to just put in kind of, look where my horizon line is, about in here. Get the proportions right. And then this part is a little bit lower. Comes down around like this. We have this clump of trees that starts above the canvas. And I want to make sure, we talked about using angular lines rather than curved lines and how they make such interesting shapes compared to round lines. See how I'm making angles here to get the shapes of these trees. And here we go. We got this one really cool tree on the end. It's almost like an exclamation point to that big shape. This scene that I'm painting for you today is called Narada Lake, and it's a beautiful lake up by Traverse City, Michigan, on the way to Sleeping Bear Dunes National Park. And this was a case of, we talked about earlier in the video, sometimes I will go out thinking that I'm going to paint something really specific, and something else will catch my eye on the way to wherever I had planned to go. This is exactly what happened when I discovered this scene. I was driving down the highway and I noticed a boardwalk right along the highway, and as I looked to my right, this is what I saw. And it just blew me away. We've got some clumps of these tall reeds right here. Let's get those in. Just kind of indicate that those are those tall grasses. Again, this is just a road map, so I'm doing this to remind me that's the tall grasses. This is the bank of the hillside. And then there was a line of trees. So a nice line of light right here. This was late afternoon. So the sun was coming from this direction and lighting up the tops of the trees. And then there was this beautiful streak of light lighting up this ground plane back here. And this line of trees. And this pretty hill. And again, even on this hill, you notice I'm not making round lines. I'm making kind of angled, broken lines. You see how much more interesting that is when we just do a round line there. Not so interesting. Nice thing too, if you want to erase, all you have to do is take a paper towel and wipe this off. So let me do that again, and look how much more interesting this is if we kind of angle those lines. Much better, much better. All right. And we have these lovely big shapes down here of the grasses. And again, I'm just going to kind of indicate where that is. And this clump of grass I'm looking at where things line up compared to each other. So this is the first time you're going to hear me say compare, compare, compare. So I'm looking at the edge of this big shape. A little more paint. This is why my brushes get worn down, because I just scrape, scrape, scrape. So there's this shape. And then this kind of goes like this. We've got like different layers at the bottom of these grasses. And then over here is just some open water. So that's kind of a nice, interesting shape. And then we'll go over here and let's look at where these clumps of grasses almost come up and meet these. I think I'm going to go ahead and overlap this one just a little bit. Just to kind of keep you in the painting. This little. Now again, like we talked about when we talked about composition, you want to make sure that the shapes are different sizes, different shapes, not all lined up in a row. Variation is the key to making an interesting painting. You see how this is lower than this. And then this kind of goes back. There's almost an angle right here where this goes back and the grasses get shorter. So that makes that shape a lot more interesting. So now I'm just thinking about my design, composition, if things feel balanced to me. And again, I'm going to leave this opening so it gives the viewer the feeling that they can walk right in there and their eye can travel around and back in here, and makes you wonder what's around the corner. Makes me want to just get in a kayak and go explore this place. We've got a few more shapes here. Just to balance this off. When I did my thumbnail sketch, remember, I felt like I really needed to have this down here, just for balance. And then we've got these wonderful reflections down here too. So I'm just going to kind of make some little notes to remind myself, okay, don't forget to put those reflections in there. And then this moss, it was a combination of kind of some moss and some water lilies and things like that. And those were just nice horizontal shapes. There's a lot of vertical shapes in this painting, so these horizontal shapes give you a nice place for your eye to rest. Verticals tend to make you feel tension, and the horizontals tend to make you feel restful. All right. So there we've got our drawing. It's basically a road map. Our big shapes, this is the biggest one here, the big shape of those trees. We've got the shape of the first hill, the distant hill, those trees, the bank in the background. We've got all of this moss and water lilies. Might just go ahead and indicate where this deadfall tree is. There was a lot more dead trees in this area than what I put in my painting. And remember, we talked about when we went over composition that it's nice to go ahead and edit and leave things out if you think they're not necessary. All right, so next we're going to start blocking in our light shapes and our shadow shapes. This is so important when you're painting on location especially. This technique has helped me to become a much faster painter when I paint outdoors. When you block in your shadows, you're getting your design established basically. And once the light starts moving, it's not going to affect you as much because the colors in the light area are going to stay pretty consistent and you'll have more time to fill those in. So the next thing we're going to do is get started with blocking in the shadow shapes. Now, one thing I am going to do is take off my glasses to paint. The reason I do that is it really simplifies everything. I do this outdoors all the time. A lot of artists just squint, and I really prefer to just take my glasses off because my eyesight is so bad that everything is simplified and I don't have to squint. And it also saves wrinkles on my face by doing it that way. So if you're lucky enough to have bad eyesight like me, try it. I really resisted trying this the first time I was told, and it has become pretty much standard practice for me. I do wear trifocals, so sometimes going back and forth with the trifocals on an easel close-up, it is nice to just go ahead and take my glasses off for a while. So when I do the block in, I'm going to do that with the glasses off, and then I will put them back on to do the finish. All right, now what I'm going to do is block in these shadows. What I'm looking at with my reference painting is big shapes of general color in those shadows. I'm going to look for my darkest darks first, and then go to the next darkest and the next darkest and the next darkest. So I'm actually going to get the atmospheric perspective reading as I go back, but all with the shadows first. So I'm going to look for my darkest darks, and as I mentioned, I use this dark purple, the cool purple. You can see the difference between the warm and the cool. I'll add just a touch of that warm purple in there. And I'm going to use that as my darkest dark. All of this will be adjusted as I go. So it won't end up being totally this dark by the time it's done. The idea of the block in is just to get the shapes and the relative color and value right. And we'll be able to see once we get this part done, just if our painting is reading correctly and where we need to make adjustments. Now you want to make sure when you're doing your darks, you keep the darks a little bit thinner. And then as you go to the lights, start working with thicker paint. There's a lot of really beautiful darks. If you've ever been out where there's reeds and grasses like this, you'll see the darks, the bottoms of them are very, very dark. I'm going to add just a touch of viridian in there. There's a lot of crimson in this purple, and adding that little bit of viridian really helps with the darks. So everywhere I see about this color and this value, I'm going to put it in. want to make sure that I don't get the paint so thin that it gets runny. Yet I want it thick enough so that I'm going to be going back in and making a lot of adjustments. So I want enough paint on the canvas so that I can go in and make adjustments, but not so much that it gets really goopy on me. Okay. There's also a line of about that color, just maybe a tiny bit lighter. I'm going to add a little bit more warm in there. Along the bottom of this row of grasses. And since that's a little bit in the distance, I'm going to just add just a touch of gray. That made that pretty purple, so let's add a little sienna. There, that grays that down just enough. I like working into the same pile of paint here as I make these adjustments, because then I can kind of gauge if I'm going the right direction. Okay. All right, anywhere else I see that color? I don't think so. Let's see, there's a little, I guess there's a little bit more right up in here. Around here. A little bit of a really dark shadow there. It's a whole lot easier to put in darks right away and get in more than you need than try to get them in later. Because if you put lights on top of your darks, it's going to dilute it and gray it down, and it's going to make it a lot tougher to get those nice darks back in the end without having to do a lot of scraping. All right, so there are all of my darkest darks. So next, I'm going to get in this big shape of this tree, and I'm just going to do the shadows. I'm going to leave the areas that are in light. And I'm seeing a lot of cool blue-green in here. So I'm going to mass in the whole thing pretty much a cool green. I'm going to use some Viridian. And I'm going to mix that right into this purple. See what that looks like. That's a little dark. Let's add a little bit of gray in there. A little of this cool green. And I'm always adjusting, and I'll try just one stroke of a color rather than painting in the whole thing and deciding, oh, that's the wrong color. So test it out first and make sure you're on the right track. So we're just going to just block in this whole general shape. And then I'll go back in and adjust color later. I usually try to get this part done pretty quickly, especially if I'm out in the field. That way I manage to keep the light, capture that light. So again, think of these shapes as like big pieces of construction paper. There's a light shape right there, so I'm going to leave that. If you don't get the same color mixed up right away every time, don't worry. Okay, here's that little piece of light there. There's another piece of light that comes down here. So I'll leave that, and there's a piece of light that comes up here. A little bit of shadow right there. This piece of tree, very top of this is in shadow. And there's a nice light area there. Leave that alone. Then this tree, there's a nice area of light right in here. It's kind of some really pretty rim lighting that was coming through the trees. So I'm going to leave that shape alone. I'm going to switch to a little bit bigger brush here. I'm going to try to use the biggest brush you can for the job. It'll make it go a lot quicker. And I'm seeing as this shape moves closer to the lit area, it's getting a little bit lighter, so a little cooler. So I'm going to make those adjustments when I go back. So this big shape right here is just about done. And all of this is in shadow. You'll see there's some variations in color in there, and we'll work on those later. Right now we just want to get this canvas covered. The surface I'm using is Clausen double primed linen, number 15. It's a surface that I've experimented with for quite a while. It's a little bit slicker. Some artists don't care for the slickness of it, but I do. I really don't care for painting on canvas anymore. I just really love the linen, and I've learned how the paint handles and the brushes I need to use to make the paint work for me. Now this tree back here is also in shadow. All of this is pretty much, that's all one shadow shape. And then there's light, and then this shape is a little bit bluer. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust this color a little bit and gray it down a little bit bluer. Just make small adjustments at a time. There, that's a little bluer. I think I need to go just a tad lighter. That looks really light on the canvas. That's actually not bad. You can make adjustments for there. So this tree is further back than these. So we talked about the atmospheric perspective and how the darks get lighter and the lights get darker. So this is an example of the dark getting lighter as we start going back in the distance. All right, so there's that shape, that group of trees. Now this is all in shadow. There was this this bank right underneath these trees, and it is really blue. It's very, very cool in color. So what I'm going to do here comes compare, compare again. What I'm going to do is mix up a color here, make it pretty blue. Try it out, and I'm going to compare, what does that look like compared to here? Is it lighter? It's a little bit lighter than that, and it's got a little more green to it. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little green here, adjust that, that's better. So I'm trying to approximate the general color of this shape. So back to the surface, you'll experiment and find the surface that you feel the most comfortable working with. As I mentioned, canvas is not my favorite anymore because it seems to absorb the paint too much, and I would rather have the paint kind of sit on top of the surface so that I can move it around and sculpt it. That's part of the fun of oil paints. Okay, so there's that bank. And now the bank back here is a lot grayer than this. So I'm going to, it's a little cooler and a little grayer. I'm going to get some of this cool gray. Add some of this purple in and a little more green. So you see all of these shadows, I'm working right into the same pile of paint. That makes it a lot easier to compare. There's that word again, compare, compare. And actually, there's a little bit more purple to this. So let's add a little more purple. See what that does. Yep. Not liking that so much. So we just adjust. That got a little dark, so I'm going to lighten it and put more blue in it. Purple got a little carried away. Lighten this up. This is where the cobalt will come in handy too when you're wanting to lighten things up in the distance. There we go. Blue things down. All right. So you can see how this bank is bluer than this bank. So that automatically graying it down helps push that into the background. So there's one whole shape there. Now let's look at, while we're working on this, let's go ahead and continue with this because this is a good lesson on atmospheric perspective. Now we'll take a look at this bank and then look at these shadows in this distant hill. And you can see there's almost purple in there is what I'm seeing. And again, I'm painting with my glasses off, so what I'm seeing is very simplified compared to what you're probably seeing watching the reference. So you might want to squint down or put on some reading glasses if you have really good vision. Something that'll help blur your vision. That's a little dark. All right, we need to get some paint on here. So this shadow is pretty blue. This may be a little too much. Yep. So there we go. So I wanted to neutralize that. That was a little bit too blue. So I neutralized it with a little bit of burnt sienna. we'll adjust this later as we go. When we start comparing. There's also a few little variations in this hillside, and I'm going to go ahead and put those in. So that'll be a nice reminder for me later. That hill's not totally flat, so we're going to there's that hill. So again, atmospheric perspective. This is very green and blue and darker. This is a little bit bluer and a little more grayed down. And then you get to this and it's very blue. So you see how that's really getting a feel of distance now as it's going back. Now we've got these trees in this middle ground. If you look at the shadows on these are a little darker than the shadows here. So they're kind of in between the color of this bank and the color of this hill. And that makes sense because they're exactly in between those two. So it would make sense that color-wise, they would also be in between those two. Hi, I'm Debra Joy Groesser, and welcome to my video. In this video, I'm going to be teaching you about capturing the effects of light and color and atmosphere, much the way the Impressionists did. The Impressionists painted the same scene over and over again in order to capture the specific time of day, the atmosphere, the feeling of the place at that moment. And that's what I'm going to talk about in this video and show you just how important it is to do that and to paint from life versus painting from photographs, and how that will help you capture color more accurately. I'm also going to go over basic landscape painting elements from composition and value, thumbnail sketches, all of those things, and the 5 types of light. And hopefully, by the time you're done with this video, you will feel more confident in going out and capturing color and light accurately in your paintings.
Well, that is Debra Joy Groesser, Understanding the Effects of Light, and you can learn more about the full course. Remember, this is brand new, brand spanking new. You can learn more about it at lilyartvideo.com. Remember, we have a special discount code for today only in the comments section. Now let's get to know Deborah.
I started painting actually when I was probably about 10 years old, 10 or 12. I won a coloring contest that our local newspaper put on in conjunction with a local paint store. And I won, I think it was $20, which was a lot of money back in the 60s. And I went to the paint store and bought my first set of acrylics and painted with those for a couple of years. Then when I was 14, my parents bought me a set of oils, and that was it. I was in love with oil painting. So after my parents bought me my first set of oils, I decided to just take every art class I could get my hands on. So I took all the classes in high school, went on to college, got my college degree in painting. And then after college, I was hired by a bank in Omaha and worked in their graphics department for a few years. And when my kids were born, I quit that job to stay home, and I did some freelancing and started painting again a little bit, and did some watercolors while my children were young so that I could keep them out and not worry about them getting into solvents and oils and all of that kind of thing. And then in 1987, took a bit of a detour in my career and got into real estate for a while. And then in 1991, I ended up marrying my current husband, and he encouraged me to get back to my art. So I was doing real estate at the time. We tried to figure out how I could do this, and I ended up, several friends of mine who were realtors came to me and brought me little note cards with pictures of people's houses on them and asked if I could do something like that, and they wanted to give them as housewarming presents to their clients. So I thought, well, I could do that. So I started doing little pen and ink drawings, making them into note cards, and that ballooned into a whole nother business. And then builders started seeing what I could do. My first husband had been a builder, so I was already doing his marketing pieces and drawings of his houses. So I started doing a lot of architectural renderings for builders and architects, and was doing the little note cards and house portraits for people. And pretty soon I was making as much doing that as I was in real estate. So got to the point, my husband Don said, well, how do we get you out of real estate and back to your art full time? And we decided I'd start teaching classes for kids, and it was amazing. We have a room in our basement that was about the right size for a classroom. And we went down there, and he said, so what do you need in order to start classes? So we talked about a sink and all the, the tables, all those things. And within 2 weeks, he had a classroom ready for me. And one of the things that I learned in real estate was a lot about marketing. And I actually did a paper newsletter when I was in real estate, and I continue doing that to this day with my art. I just went from, it was kind of seamless actually, going from real estate to art with the newsletter. And I advertised my classes through my newsletter and filled up immediately, ended up teaching 5 days a week. My classes I had waiting lists. It was really fun. And so I was able to end up getting out of real estate. In 1996, I had taken over the basement, I had taken over a spare bedroom in the house, I took over the office, and when I took over the dining room, my husband said, honey, I think it's time we find you a place for your art. So we found a little building in our downtown of Ralston, Nebraska, and purchased that and moved my classroom down there, and within a year I had outgrown it. So we did a big addition on the back of that and opened a gallery and built on a beautiful studio in the back with a classroom and my studio above. And that's where I am to this day. So I quit real estate officially in 1996. And I've been a full-time painter ever since, and I've never looked back. I became president of the American Impressionist Society in January of 2013, and in 2015 I became the CEO and president, and I am still in that role to this day. It has been such an incredible joy to lead this organization. And basically what my role was up until this year, when we hired our very first executive director, was I worked with our board and our officers and helped organize our juried shows. Up until this year, we had 2 national juried exhibitions. Our national show that's in the fall, and 4 years ago we added a small work show that's in the spring. This year, now that we have our executive director, we've been able to add an online exhibition, and then we also are doing artist retreats. We had our very first one in August of 2020, and we're hoping to offer more opportunities for our members. While I've been president, as I said, we added the small work show. We've updated our website, have a whole new website and membership system. The organization is open to anyone who's interested in Impressionism, and that's our mission is to promote the appreciation of Impressionism through workshops, education, exhibitions, and more. And so I would highly recommend, if you are interested, you can check out the website at AmericanImpressionistsociety.org. And it's not juried to be a member. You do have to be juried into the shows, but we have a lot of other opportunities besides the exhibitions that people can take part in. And you don't have to be a professional artist to be a member. We just want to encourage everybody. It's really like a family, and we just would love to bring more of you into our AIS family. The type of art that inspires me the most is probably the Impressionists, which is probably not a surprise given my role with the American Impressionist Society. I am so drawn to how they captured light and the effects of light. I really love, there's lots of different aspects of Impressionism and different groups. There's the California Impressionists and the way that they captured the light and the scenery in California. My husband and I spend a lot of time out there, so going to these places, the Laguna Beach area, and seeing, the scenes that the California Impressionists painted, just blows me away. And of course the French Impressionists, Claude Monet and Pissarro and Sicily and all of those. I also love Mary Cassatt. I really loved Andrew Wyeth, and I still love Andrew Wyeth, obviously, with the quote above my easel in my studio. And the work that I did in college was very Wyeth-esque, I guess I would say, a lot of drawing and a lot of the sepia tones and things like that. But I think the Impressionists and the way that they use light, that's the most inspiring to me. I'd describe my style of painting as kind of realistic Impressionism. My paintings tend to range from really loose with my plein air work to tighter in the studio. So they're not as loose as Monet, but they're definitely not as tight as some of the realism that you see today. So I think it's kind of a mix of that. There's a range, just as there's a range with Impressionism when you consider the style of Monet versus the Russian Impressionists or some of the California Impressionists where the drawing's a little bit more defined. That's kind of, my work has that same kind of range to it. I find my ideal subject usually according to the light that is hitting the subject. I really love landscapes. I love portraiture too. I do quite a number of portraits. But normally it's a landscape, it's something about the way the light is hitting the subject. A lot of times I'll go out with something in mind, a place that I'm going to go paint, and then something else will catch my eye along the way that the light or the atmosphere or the color is just really dramatic. And so I'll stop and paint that instead. And funny story about light on a subject. I was painting with a group of artists at a ranch in the Flint Hills of Kansas a few years ago. And I was the second one to arrive. The first person that arrived was already there painting. I found an old antique piece of farm equipment that really caught my eye, and it was backlit and the light was streaming underneath it. The grass was really almost neon green, and the light between the spokes of the wheels on this piece of equipment was amazing. So even though I originally had been attracted to the landscape that I saw at the entrance to the ranch, I ended up painting this piece of machinery. And none of the artists knew what it was, and neither did I. And I was so happy with the way the piece turned out, and I called my husband and explained what it was and asked if he knew what it was. So he said, well, I'll look at your painting when you get home. So I get home, So proud of this painting, pulled it out of my paint box and showed him, and he said, "Nice manure spreader, honey." And I thought, oh no. But it was a really good lesson in really anything can be a beautiful subject if the light is right and if it inspires you. And funnily enough, a good friend of ours ended up purchasing that painting, and he still farms, and he grew up actually running one of those manure spreaders. I feel what makes a great painting is that it has a story to tell, that technically it's good as far as composition, drawing. I'm kind of a stickler for drawing. I've been drawing since I was 3 years old, and so drawing is kind of my strong suit. So I'm kind of a stickler for that. If the drawing's accurate, the technically it's good, but I think overall what makes a good painting is the feeling that it evokes, the story that it tells. And I think if the artist really felt the subject, I think you can really tell that in a painting, whether there's emotion in it and whether they've captured the mood, the spirit of the place. I think, to me, that's what makes a great painting. My goal for a painting when I head out really is to capture the spirit of the place, to capture that moment in time, the light at that fleeting moment that you're witnessing. And my goal is always to try to let the viewer experience everything that I experienced when I painted it, and to feel what I felt. That's my biggest goal. I really want it to, really want the viewer to experience what I experienced, and to make a technically good painting, but just a painting that speaks to the viewer's heart. The main differences for me between studio and plein air painting is, number one, as we talked about in the video, you can see color so much more accurately when you're painting plein air and when you're painting from life. Painting in the studio from photographs, it's really tough for me to do that if I don't have a plein air study to go along with it. I think the other thing that is such a difference between plein air and studio is the plein air paintings have such a freshness to them because you're doing them right there. It's immediate, it's quick, it's intuitive, and they just have such a freshness that you don't get when you're painting in the studio, because in the studio you have unlimited time and the sun's not changing, the light's not going away, you don't have to worry about a storm blowing up and clouds coming in and your sun going away or your subject moving. So I think for me, plein air hands down is my favorite. I only do studio pieces, well, I shouldn't say only, but mostly I do studio pieces in the wintertime. I'm a bit of a fair weather plein air painter, and it gets pretty cold in the winters in Nebraska. So that's my studio time where I'll take my studies and then work them into studio pieces. I stay inspired and motivated in a number of different ways. If I'm having a hard time getting going, figuring out what I want to paint, sometimes I'll just go out for a drive. And it seems like, when I do that, I can kind of clear my head. And getting out in nature, sometimes just going for a walk will inspire me. I will watch instructional videos. I'll read art books. I have a whole collection of wonderful art books, a lot of them about Impressionism. And that always helps get me jump started if I'm having a hard time being inspired. I hope to inspire others just by, I guess, encouraging and through teaching. I've done a lot of teaching over the years and really hope to inspire my students to explore their inner creativity The thing I want to encourage everyone is, no matter if you decide that you want to do art as a career, or if you just strictly want to do it just for your own enjoyment, art can bring so much healing, so much joy, not only to the artist, but to the people who view your art. So I just really try to encourage everybody that you can do it. If I could do this, anybody could do this. And you really just need to put in the brush miles and just practice. When I was teaching children, I used to tell them, if you want to be a good artist, it's no different than being a good soccer player or a good pianist. If you want to learn to play the piano or play a musical instrument, you need to practice a little bit every day. And the same thing with sports. You know, people who are at the highest levels of the sports world, they practice a little bit every day. And so if you just even pick up a pencil in the morning and draw your breakfast, draw your coffee cup, and just do a little bit every single day, you'll be really surprised how quickly you will get the hang of it. And there's so much great information out there now and good resources. There's a lot of videos and books and people who are teaching that there's a lot of places you can go to find good instruction, and these videos like this are a great way to do it too. But that's how I hope to inspire people, just by encouraging you that you can really do this, and just pretend you're 5 years old. Don't be intimidated. Just let it flow. And there's no right or wrong. There just is no right or wrong when it comes to art.
Well, that is Debra Joy Groesser, and the video is Understanding the Effects of Light. And you can learn more about the full course at lilyartvideo.com. Remember, there's a special discount code for you today only in the comments section. Also remember, we have a fantastic free video. It's a 2-hour video. It's worth about $107. We're giving it to you for free. It's called 97 Amazing Painting Secrets from the World's Best Artists. We took some of the best videos and some of the best secrets, and we put them together, edited it together. It's a lot of fun. You can find it for free at 97tips.com. Thank you for watching. I'm Eric Rhodes. We'll see you tomorrow.
Hi, I'm Debra Joy Groesser, and welcome to my video. In this video, I'm going to be teaching you about capturing the effects of light and color and atmosphere, much the way the Impressionists did. The Impressionists painted the same scene over and over again in order to capture the specific time of day, the atmosphere, the feeling of the place at that moment. And that's what I'm going to talk about in this video, and show you just how important it is to do that and to paint from life versus painting from photographs, and how that will help you capture color more accurately. I'm also going to go over basic landscape painting elements, from composition and value, thumbnail sketches, all of those things, and the 5 types of light. And hopefully, by the time you're done with this video, you will feel more confident in going out and capturing color and light accurately in your paintings.